I've never considered myself a person who likes to change routes. 35 years of driving a truck have taught me to appreciate the beaten path. When I was young, of course, I tried taking shortcuts on country roads looking for alternative routes. But by the time I was 40, I realized that the shortest way is the one you know well. The house on Maple Street in Bloomington was my final destination, where I always returned after a long haul. 2 stories with a spacious front porch and chipped paint on the shutters. Nothing special, but the house I was born and raised in. My wife of 32 years, Elizabeth, met me here after every flight. When she left, taking a piece of my soul with her 3 years ago, the house began to feel too big and empty. That's when my son Bryce offered to move in with Harper and me. "You won't be so lonely, Dad," he said, awkwardly patting me on the shoulder at the wake. And I was so stunned with grief that I just nodded. Now, in my 67, I realized that was the first mistake I made. Bryce had always been a quiet, cautious kid. When the other boys were running around, he preferred to sit with a book. Elizabeth said it was good for the boy to grow up educated. But I sometimes wondered if my temper was to blame. Perhaps I was too seldom at home, traveling around the country with cargo. Maybe he lacked a man's example every day instead of every 2 weeks. Whatever the case, Bryce grew up, not at all like me, working in a warehouse with no desire to see the world outside of Bloomington. He met Harper at the local supermarket where she worked as a cashier, a petite woman with a sharp chin and a tenacious gaze. The first thing she asked when we met was, "Is the house big? How many rooms?" At the time, I chalked it up to normal curiosity. The move was quick. They took the whole 2nd floor and I stayed in the bedroom on the 1st floor, the same one where Elizabeth and I had lived. Things were going well at first. They found Bryce would leave for work early in the morning, Harper by noon. I woke up at my usual pace, no alarm clock, at 6:30, and for most of the day, the house belonged to me alone. The first bell started ringing after about 6 months of them living in my house. One day, I heard Harper talking on the phone in the kitchen. She hadn't noticed me coming back from my morning walk earlier than usual. The old man was always fixing things. Knocking, drilling. "It's like it's still his house," she complained to someone. "Bryce and I have lived here for 6 months now, and I feel like a guest." I froze in the hallway, hesitant to go in. Something inside me tingled unpleasantly. Of course he's old. He'll be fully retired soon. "You should see the suitcase of pills he has in the bathroom." Harper chuckled. "Bryce says the house will be ours someday, but someday may come too late." So I quietly went outside and returned 15 minutes later, slamming the door loudly. Harper greeted me with a strained smile. Then came the little things that individually seemed insignificant, but together added up to a disturbing picture. My tools in the garage were constantly out of place. The pictures of Elizabeth on the mantelpiece. Harper first moved them to a corner, then suggested they be removed. "It's so depressing, Randall," she said, shaking her head. "You need to move on. Move on. That's easy to say. I spent 42 years with Elizabeth. She'd been my north, south, east, and west, all coordinates on the map of life. And now my sister-in-law was suggesting we just erase those coordinates." Bryce always took his wife's side in these situations. "Harper's right, Dad. Maybe you should think about a support group for widowers. Or, Harper just wants to freshen up the interior a bit. It's our house, too, after all. Our home." That phrase was coming out more and more often and more confidently. Yet none of them offered to contribute to the bills or property taxes. One day I came back from the garage and heard a muffled argument coming from their upstairs bedroom.
"But I can't just ask him about it."
Bryce's voice sounded unsure.
"Why not? It's important to us."
Harper didn't hide her irritation.
"We need to know how the house is decorated. If your mother left it to both of you, you're entitled to your share right now."
"I don't even know if there's a will."
"Then find out."
"Jesus, Bryce! You're 34 years old and you're afraid to ask your own father about an inheritance. We're living like tenants, even though this house should be half yours." I walked slowly back down the stairs, trying not to make a sound. Something snapped inside of me that day. I'd always thought that Bryce had just wanted to support me after Elizabeth's death. Now it was becoming clear that he and Harper were just calculating when they could get the house. Home dinners turned into tense silences, punctuated by the clinking of cutlery and one-word answers. Harper began leaving nursing home brochures in prominent places. "Look at this, Randall," she said one day, slipping me a glossy prospectus. "Sun Valley. It's got such wonderful facilities, general activities, medical staff, and no worries about the house." I looked at the pictures of smiling old men playing cards in the sterile, clean recreation room. "Thank you, Harper, but I prefer my home." "Of course," she smiled strained. "Just think about it. Such a big house for one person. It's a lot of work." "I'm still perfectly capable of taking care of myself and my house," I replied, pushing the booklet aside. After this incident, Harper became more active. One time I found my bedroom door unlocked. Someone had damaged the lock mechanism. Another time, the water in the shower suddenly became scalding hot while I was washing myself. Bryce apologized, saying he had accidentally turned the faucet that regulates the boiler temperature. The little accidents happened more and more often. Elizabeth's things began to disappear from the house. First, her favorite vase disappeared from the kitchen table. "Oh, that old thing?" Harper shrugged when I asked. "It broke when I was cleaning the window. Sorry, I forgot to tell you." Then the jewelry box from the bedroom disappeared. "I guess you just put it somewhere else, Dad," Bryce said. "You've been forgetting things a lot lately. I've never forgotten where I put Elizabeth's things. I never have." That night, lying in bed, I thought seriously for the first time that I needed to protect myself, not from burglars or crooks, but from my own family, from my own son and his wife, who were methodically trying to drive me out of my home. The next day I called Evelyn Quincy, an old acquaintance of mine who worked as a receptionist at the law firm Hammond and Associates. We met at a small cafe 2 blocks from my house. "Family matters can be very complicated, Randall," she said after listening to me. "Especially when it comes to real estate, you need a good lawyer." "I don't have money for expensive lawyers, Evie." "Don't worry, I know someone who can help you, a lawyer who specializes specifically in elder law." 2 days later, I was sitting in the office of Pierce Higgs, an older lawyer with a shrewd eye and a neatly trimmed gray beard. "Mr. Nimble, first of all, let's clarify the legal status of your house," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Who owns the property by deed?" "I do," I answered. "The house belonged to my parents, and after their death it passed to me. I'm the sole heir." "And your late wife? Did you register the house in her name too?"
No, we talked about it, but we never went through with the paperwork. Elizabeth always said it was a hassle since we were already married.
Higgs nodded, making notes. "And your son? Do you have any written arrangements for the house to go to him? A will? A deed of gift? Something like that?" I shook my head. I'd always assumed that Bryce would inherit the house when I died, but we'd never done any paperwork. "Then, legally, the house belongs to you, and only you have the right to decide who lives in it." The lawyer looked at me over his glasses. "But I can see that the problem is deeper than just the legal aspects." I told him about the gradually deteriorating relationship with my son and daughter-in-law, about missing things, about accidental incidents in the house. "Unfortunately, these situations are not uncommon," Higgs sighed. "Especially when it comes to real estate. People can get impatient when it comes to inheritances. What would you advise me to do?" "First, let's get you legally safe. I'll have your title deeds prepared in case there are any claims. Secondly, I'd recommend you keep a diary of all suspicious incidents, dates, times, details, and, if possible, install cameras or voice recorders." "Do you think it might come to that?" I asked, feeling bitter at the thought of having to spy on my own son. "I hope not, but it's better to be prepared for any eventuality," Higgs replied. "One more thing, Mr. Nimble. I understand that you don't want to conflict with your son, but in this situation the most important thing is your safety. If you feel threatened, don't hesitate to contact the police." I nodded, although the thought of calling the police on my own son seemed wild. Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt a mixture of determination and sadness. Had it really come to this? Do I really have to defend myself against my own children? On the way home, I stopped at an electronics store and purchased 2 small cameras and a voice recorder. The salesman, a young guy with an eyebrow piercing, enthusiastically told me about video resolution and memory capacity. I listened half-heartedly, thinking about how to discreetly install these devices in the house. That evening, when Bryce and Harper left for some party, I placed one camera in the living room, pointed at the front door, and the other in my bedroom, hidden among the books on the shelf. I put the recorder in the pocket of my home jacket, which I usually hung in the hallway. At dinner the next day, Bryce suddenly asked, "Dad, I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. How would you feel about remortgaging the house to Harper and me? You know, while you're alive. It would save a lot of paperwork later." I slowly set my fork aside, trying to remain calm. "What's that for?" "Well, you know how complicated inheritance is," Harper interjected. "Taxes, lawyers. This way it'll be smooth, and you won't have to worry about paperwork, accounts." "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of my accounts," I said, "and I don't plan to change anything on the deed to the house yet." Harper's face froze, and Bryce looked disappointed. "Dad, we're not being self-serving. We just want it to be done right." "I think it's exactly right now." I looked him straight in the eye. "The house belongs to me, and I see no reason to change that in my lifetime." After dinner, I heard them arguing in the kitchen, thinking I had already gone up to my room. "See, I told you so," Harper hissed. "He'll never give up the house willingly. We'll be waiting forever. What are you suggesting?" Bryce's voice sounded tired. "I can't force him." "Can't or won't?" Harper's voice was ringing with steel. "We need to act more decisively. I'm tired of living in limbo." I quietly went upstairs, feeling cold inside. These were no longer petty annoyances. They were openly discussing how to deprive me of my home that I had lived in all my life. The next morning, I called Higgs and told him about the conversation. "Document everything," he advised, "and be prepared for them to take more aggressive action." "Like what?" "Trying to prove you're incompetent. It's a common tactic in these situations." I remembered Bryce's words about forgetting things and realized that this might be part of the plan. What can I do? Get a medical evaluation, a complete one, with cognitive tests. This will be your proof of capacity if they try to challenge your rights. I took his advice. Dr. Morgan, my primary care physician for 20 years, was surprised by my request but performed all the necessary tests. "Randall, you're in great shape for your age," he said as he reviewed the results. "Your blood pressure's a little high, but nothing critical. And on the cognitive tests, you did better than a lot of 40-year-olds. I asked him to provide me with a written report, which I sent to Higgs to keep on file. When I returned home, I found that Harper had been going through my things again in my absence. I noticed it at once. An old picture box had been moved and a desk drawer was not fully closed. That evening, I decided it was time to be proactive. I already knew they weren't going to stop, and I needed to be prepared. I gathered up my most prized possessions, documents, and memorabilia related to Elizabeth, and took them to my old friend Keith, who we'd worked together as truckers for almost 20 years. "You can keep this with me as long as you need it," Keith said, as he helped carry the boxes in. "But what's going on, Rand? It's like you're getting ready to evacuate."
"You could say that," I replied.
"Just a little family emergency." Keith nodded understandingly, not asking any more questions. That was always one of his best qualities. He respected personal boundaries. When I got home, I felt oddly relieved. No matter what happened next, my most precious possessions were safe. And I was ready for a fight, no matter how bitter it turned out to be. Spring always came in Bloomington in a way. At first the trees were bare and unfriendly, and then, in just a week, they would turn tender green. Keith lived on the outskirts of town in a small house with a large plot of land. His wife had died before my Elizabeth, and now he lived there alone, surrounded by memories and the junk he'd collected all his life. "Stay a couple more days," he suggested when I was about to leave. "It's been a long time since we've sat together like old times." We spent 3 days together, 3 days filled with stories of long flights, strange traveling companions, and roadside diners with the most disgusting coffee on the entire continent. Keith was one of those rare people with whom you could be silent for hours without it seeming awkward. We'd often just sit on his old veranda, sipping non-alcoholic beer. The doctors had banned us from real beer about 10 years ago, and watching the sunset. "Are you sure you don't want to tell me what's going on with you and the kid?" he asked on the third night. I was silent for a long time, rolling the fogged bottle in my hands. "You know, Kate, you remember Bryce as a boy. Remember how he'd wait for me to come in from a trip, how he'd run out to meet the truck?" I paused. "Sometimes I think that boy is dead. And now there's a complete stranger in front of me with my son's face." Keith nodded without interrupting. "He married a woman who wants my house more than anything else in life." And slowly, I began to notice that Bryce was looking at me through her eyes, not like a son on his father, but like a man waiting for valuable real estate to become vacant.
"Shit happens, man." Kate rubbed his chin.
"But you can always come here. I've got plenty of room. We can handle it." I nodded gratefully, but we both knew that wasn't the answer. At 67, it's not easy to start your life from scratch, abandoning everything you've spent decades building. The next morning, I decided to go home. The tension of the last few weeks wouldn't let go, and I wanted to check in on what was going on in my absence. I checked my phone before I left, not a single call from Bryce or Harper. They hadn't even asked where I was or when I'd be back. "Keep me posted," Kate said as I got into my old pickup. "And remember, there's always an alternate airfield." The drive to Bloomington took about an hour. I drove while listening to old country music cassettes that Elizabeth always thought were terrible, but tolerated for my sake. Mentally, I prepared myself for another tense evening in the company of Bryce and Harper, for their awkward pauses and fake smiles, but the reality was worse than any expectations. I parked in front of the house at the beginning of the third day. Everything looked the same as usual. The same cracked shutters, the same old bench on the porch that I'd been meaning to paint since last summer. I took out my keys, walked up the steps, and put the key in the keyhole. It didn't fit. I frowned and tried again, thinking I'd just inserted the key wrong. But no, the metal was resting against something foreign, not turning. The lock had been changed. My first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe the lock had broken and they'd called a handyman to replace it. But then, why hadn't they called me? I knocked. No one answered. I knocked harder, then pressed the doorbell and held my finger until my shoulder ached. Silence. Going around the house, I checked the back door. There was a new lock there, too. The first floor windows appeared to be locked from the inside, and the curtains tightly drawn. I felt like a burglar in my own home. Walking back to the car, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Bryce's number. He didn't answer. Then I tried Harper's number, also, to no avail. I sat on the bench on the veranda, trying to figure out what was going on. Had they really taken this step? Had they just changed the locks, hoping I would leave? It seemed so ridiculous, so outside the realm of normal human relationships, that my mind refused to accept it. An hour later, the car of a neighbor, Mrs. Donovan, pulled up in front of the house. She looked curiously at me, sitting on the porch of her own house, but said nothing. I raised my hand in greeting, and she nodded and disappeared into her house. I decided to wait for Bryce or Harper to return. I sat on the veranda, watching the sun slowly slip toward the horizon. The air was getting cooler, but I didn't move from my seat. A mixture of anger and confusion was building up inside. Around 6 p.m., Bryce's car appeared in the driveway. I straightened up, preparing for a confrontation, but the car, noticing me, stopped abruptly. The engine stalled, but no one got out. Through the tinted glass, I could see the silhouettes of Bryce and Harper, clearly arguing about something. Finally, the door opened, and Harper got out first. She was dressed in a supermarket cashier's uniform. Apparently, they were coming straight from her job.
Bryce got out next, pale and nervous. "Dad," he began, but Harper interrupted him.
"Randall, we weren't expecting you so soon." Her voice sounded businesslike, like I was an annoying customer. "I can't get into my own house," I said, trying to sound calm. "Someone had changed the locks." Harper and Bryce looked at each other.
"You see," Harper began, stepping forward.
Bryce and I thought about it for a long time and decided it was best for everyone. "You're an old man and it's hard for you to manage a house this big." "Who changed the locks on my house?" I repeated, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. "We did," Bryce said, avoiding my gaze. "On whose orders?" "Look, Dad, we thought it was time to set the record straight," Harper interrupted him again. "This house is too big for you alone. You're always traveling and we live here all the time, and besides, Mom always said it would be our house." I stared at her, not believing my ears. Elizabeth had never said anything like that, especially not to Harper, whom she'd known only a few years before she died.
"I own the house," I said slowly and clearly.
"Legally, it's all mine, and I demand that you give me the keys to the new locks immediately." Harper crossed her arms over her chest. "Actually, no. We consulted a lawyer, and he said that since we've lived here for over 2 years and invested in the upkeep of the house, we have certain rights." This was an outright lie. I knew for a fact that not a penny of their pockets went to pay bills or make repairs. But Harper spoke as confidently as if she really believed what she was saying. "What lawyer?" I asked. "Give me his name." Harper hesitated for a moment. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that Bryce and I decided that it would be best for you to—" "Where?" I interrupted. "Where would I be better off, Harper? There are wonderful nursing homes." She smiled, that fake smile she used when talking to particularly cranky customers at the supermarket. "Or maybe you could get a smaller apartment. At your age, you don't need to worry about a big house." I shifted my gaze to Bryce, who looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. "Do you agree with that, son?" He shifted awkwardly from foot to foot.
"Dad, we really think it's for the best.
You said yourself that the house was too big for you after Mom died." "I never said anything like that," I said. "Enough of this circus." Harper pulled out her cell phone. "Randall, if you don't leave, I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you're trying to break into our house." "Your house?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation.
"Harper, do you realize you're committing a crime? Unlawful eviction of an owner is a felony."
Her eyes narrowed. "Prove you're the owner." She grinned. "You don't even have your papers with you, do you? They're all in the house. And we have a lease signed by you." That was another lie. There was no lease.
But I realized what she was getting at.
The paperwork was in the safe in my office. Or, rather, they had been before I'd had the foresight to take copies to Higgs. "Okay." I slowly got up from the bench. "I'm leaving. But this isn't over, Harper. It's not over. Are you threatening us?" She defiantly picked up her phone. "I'm recording." "I'm just stating a fact," I said calmly.
"You made a mistake and it will have consequences."
I stepped off the porch and headed for my car. Bryce jerked as if he wanted to say something, but Harper held his hand. Getting behind the wheel, I started the engine and slowly pulled into the driveway, feeling their stares on me. It wasn't until I'd gone a few blocks that I let myself stop and let out the emotions I'd been holding back all this time. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt hollow. My own son. How could he do that? How could he stand next to that woman and let her kick his father out of the house he'd grown up in? I sat like that for about 20 minutes, trying to collect my thoughts. Then I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number. "Kate, it's me. Remember that alternate airfield you were talking about?" When I got back to Keith, I told him everything that had happened.
He listened in silence, only the jowls in his cheekbones moving to show his anger. "Stay as long as you need to," he said when I was done. "And call your lawyer tomorrow. These little crooks shouldn't get off that easy." I didn't sleep much that night. Lying on the couch in Keith's living room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation with Harper and Bryce in my head. Their faces, their voices, their lies. It all felt like a nightmare. I called Higgs first thing in the morning. The lawyer listened to me with professional calm, asking clarifying questions and making notes. "What they've done is illegal," he said. "Without a court order, no one can evict a homeowner from their home. We will file a lawsuit for illegal eviction and demand compensation for moral damages." "I just want to go back to my house," I said tiredly. "And you will, Mr. Nimble. But before we act, I need you to do something. Call Harper again and record the conversation. Have her say she evicted you herself. That would be direct evidence." I agreed, though the very thought of talking to Harper again made me cringe. Dialing the number, I put it on speakerphone and started recording on the tape recorder I'd brought with me. Harper answered after the 5th ring, her voice sounding wary. "Go ahead." "Harper, it's Randall. I want to be clear again. You and Bryce have really changed the locks on my house and you're refusing to let me back in? We already talked about this yesterday," she said with irritation in her voice. "We changed the locks, and you don't live here anymore. That's our decision, and it's final. But it's my house," I said. "I pay the taxes on it, all the bills." "Was yours," Harper interrupted. "It's our house now. Bryce and I deserved it a long time ago, and you better get over it, Randall. It's not healthy to be nervous at your age." Her condescending tone was meant to hurt me, to piss me off, but instead of anger, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if something inside me had been severed, the last thread that had bound me to these people. "How brave of you," I said in a steady voice. "What?" Harper was obviously expecting a different reaction. "I said, how brave of you," I repeated. "To illegally evict a homeowner based on a fictitious right, a very bold move." There was a pause in the phone. Are you threatening me?" Her tone changed to one of uncertainty. "Not at all. Just stating a fact. You're a very brave woman, Harper. Not everyone would commit a felony." "What felony?" "We're just unlawful eviction, trespassing, possibly theft if you got rid of my stuff. The list goes on and on." "We have a lawyer." Her voice shook. "He says we have every right to—" "What's his name?" I interrupted. "That lawyer. Give me his contacts. I want to talk to him personally." Pause again. "I don't have to tell you, because he doesn't exist," I finished for her. "There's no lawyer who says you can just take the legal owner out of his house. You can't prove anything." Now there was panic in her voice. "You have no proof that the house is yours." "All the papers are here." "Are you sure?" I allowed myself a slight smile. "Absolutely sure, Harper." She didn't answer, but I could hear her ragged breathing. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "Justice," I answered simply. "Nothing more," and pressed the end button to end the call. I looked at Keith, who had been sitting next to me the whole time, listening grimly to the conversation. "She's scared," he remarked. "She's going to do something stupid now. That's what we're counting on," I nodded. "I'll send the tape to Higgs." The lawyer received the audio and called right back. "That's great, Mr. Nimble. This is exactly what we need. I'll prepare the paperwork immediately and send a formal notice to your son and his wife. I expect they'll hear from us in a couple days." "What's next?" I asked. "We'll proceed according to the situation. But don't worry, the law is completely on your side. They made a serious mistake and they will have to answer for it." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange emptiness. It felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life from the outside. Had Bryce and I gotten to the point where we were communicating through lawyers? Had my own son kicked me out of the home where I'd raised him? "Hey," Kate put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't be sad. You're doing the right thing. They chose this path for themselves." I nodded, though I was still hurting inside, not because of the house, because of the betrayal that the person I'd loved most in the world since Elizabeth had been capable of such a despicable act. You know, I said quietly, I always thought the worst part was losing Elizabeth. And it turns out that losing my son while he was still alive was much worse. Keith squeezed my shoulder silently. He understood. He, too, had experienced loss not just of his wife, but of his daughter, who'd gone to another state and had little contact with him. "What are you going to do now?" he asked after a moment of silence. I took a deep breath, gathering my strength. "What I have to do, I'm going to fight for justice. Not for my own sake, but for Elizabeth's memory. She wouldn't have wanted our house to go to people who would do such a thing." Keith nodded, and we both fell silent, watching the setting sun through his living room window. There was a battle ahead that I'd never prepared for, but there was nowhere to retreat. Too much was at stake, not just the house, but the memory of my entire life spent in it. I spent the next 2 days in a strange daze. Keith tried to distract me with talk of old times, suggested watching a baseball game on TV, even took me fishing on the local lake. I mechanically kept up the conversation, cast the rod, cooked breakfast in his cramped kitchen. But inside I felt nothing but emptiness. It was as if a part of me remained in that house on Maple Street, locked behind new locks. Higgs was working at an impressive rate. On the second day after our conversation, he invited me to his office to sign the prepared documents. "Everything is ready, Mr. Nimble," he said, laying out the papers on the desk. "We are sending a formal notice of unlawful eviction, a demand for immediate restoration of your rights as owner, and a warning of legal action if the demands are not met within 48 hours. I looked over the paperwork. The dry legal language and the fine print seemed strangely soothing. No emotion, just facts and references to legislation. "What if they ignore this letter?" I asked, signing the last page. "They won't." Higgs allowed himself a slight smile. "The letter will be delivered by courier with an official return receipt. They'll have to sign for it. And if they refuse to accept it, we'll send it through the sheriff's office to make an extra impression. And if they don't respond? Then we immediately file a lawsuit in court, and at the same time we go to the police to report the illegal eviction. In such cases, law enforcement usually accompanies the legal owner in returning to his property. But to be honest, it rarely comes to that. Most people get scared at the official notification stage." I nodded, hoping he was right. The idea of having to go back to my own house with a police escort seemed absurd and humiliating. "There's something else," Higgs added, pulling another document out of the folder. "Given the gravity of the situation, I recommend that you consider disinheriting your son. It may seem cruel, but under the circumstances—" "No," I interrupted. "I'm not ready to make such a decision right now. Let's deal with the house first." Higgs nodded understandingly and put the document away. "Whatever you say, just keep that possibility in mind." In the meantime, he handed me an envelope. "This is for you." "What is it?" "A notarized copy of the title to your house. Keep it with you in case you run into your relatives." I took the envelope, feeling oddly relieved. I now had physical proof that the house belonged to me, a small shield against Harper's lies. "A courier will deliver the papers this afternoon," Higgs said as he walked me out. "Keep in touch, Mr. Nimble. If they try to contact you directly, don't discuss anything without my presence." Returning to Keith, I told him about the meeting with the lawyer. My old friend listened with an approving smile. "It's good that you're going through a lawyer," he said. "You know what I would do if I were you? I'd come down with a bolt cutter and cut the damn locks off. But your way makes more sense." I could hear the slight disappointment in his voice, and I smiled. Keith always preferred direct action to legal niceties. The day dragged on slowly. I checked my phone several times, waiting for a message from Higgs about the delivery of the documents, but time passed and there was no news. Finally, around 6 p.m., as Keith and I were preparing dinner, the phone rang. "Mr. Nimble," Higgs' voice sounded pleased. "I am pleased to report that the documents have been successfully delivered and received. Your sister-in-law signed the delivery notice. How did she react?" The courier reported that she looked surprised. Apparently, she didn't expect such a quick response. After talking to Higgs, I felt strangely elated. For the first time in days, something was happening according to my plan rather than Harper's. It was a small but important victory. Keith noticed the change in my mood and offered to celebrate with a beer. A real one, not the non-alcoholic surrogate we usually drank. "To hell with the doctors, you can have one," he winked. We sat on the veranda of his house, watching the sunset and sipping beer from fogged bottles. For the first time in days, I felt something resembling calm. "You know," Keith said, looking at the horizon, "I always thought the hardest things in life were the roads. Bad visibility, ice, daredevils on the highway. But it turns out the real challenge starts when you stop driving. Getting old is a job, too, and a damn hard one." I nodded silently. He was right. No one prepares you for having to fight for your rights with your own kids, to stand up for your dignity when you've already been written off. The phone rang unexpectedly, making us both wince. Bryce's name popped up on the screen. "Don't answer it," Kate warned him. "Remember what the lawyer said?" I nodded and let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, the phone rang again, and again, and again. After the fifth ring, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'll just listen to what he has to say," I mumbled, pressing the receive button. "Dad?" Bryce's voice sounded tense. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I answered neutrally. "Not over the phone. Can we meet where you are right now?" "I'm on the phone with my lawyer, Bryce," I interrupted him, remembering Higgs's advice. "If you want to discuss the situation, it should be in his presence." "Lawyer?" There was panic in his voice. "Dad, we don't need lawyers. We're a family. A family doesn't throw each other out on the street and change the locks," I replied coldly. "It was Harper," I said coldly. "It was Harper." His voice was pleading. "She insisted. I didn't want this to happen." Something inside me trembled. My boy, my son. Had he really just fallen under the influence of his wife? "Dad, please," Bryce continued. "Let's meet tomorrow. I'll explain everything." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give him a chance to explain. But the other part, the more rational part, reminded me of the betrayal, of the way he'd stood by Harper when she'd kicked me out of the house. "If you want to talk, come by my lawyer's office tomorrow morning at 10, I finally said. "I'll tell him you'll be there." "But Dad." "That's my condition, Bryce. It's either that or we go through the lawyers." There was a pause, and then he said quietly, "Okay, text me the address." I ended the call and looked at Keith, who'd been sitting next to me the whole time, listening intently. "Do you think he genuinely wants to make up?" I asked. Keith shook his head. "I don't know, buddy, but you were right to insist on seeing a lawyer. Let him prove first that he really wants to make things right." I immediately called Higgs and told him about my conversation with Bryce. The lawyer approved of my decision and promised to prepare for the meeting. "It's possible that this is an attempt to mitigate the consequences or to buy time," he warned. "Be prepared for the possibility that your son may not act on his own." The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned on the couch, thinking about the upcoming meeting. What would Bryce say? Was he truly remorseful, or was this just a new ploy? And most importantly, would I ever be able to trust him again? In the morning, Keith and I arrived at Higgs' office 15 minutes before the appointed time. The lawyer was already waiting for us, dressed in a strict suit and with an unchanged folder of documents in his hands. "Mr. Quinlan may attend as your trusted friend," he said when I introduced Keith. Sometimes it's good to have a witness not directly involved in the case. We were seated in the meeting room, a large dark wood table, comfortable chairs, a carafe of water. It looked solid and imposing. I sat down next to Higgs and Keith sat a little farther back against the wall. At 10:05, the door opened and Bryce walked in. Alone, without Harper. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes, the wrinkled shirt, the nervous look in his eyes. When he saw Keith, he flinched slightly but said nothing. "Good morning, Mr. Nimble," Higgs greeted him formally. "Please have a seat." Bryce lowered himself awkwardly into the chair across from us. "Dad, he began, but Higgs raised his hand, stopping him.
Before we begin, let me be clear about the purpose of our meeting," the lawyer said. "Your father has received serious abuse from you and your wife, including unlawful eviction from his own home. You have received a formal notice of violation of the law and a demand for immediate restoration of your rights as an owner.
You are here to discuss how you intend to comply with these demands." Bryce shifted his gaze from Higgs to me confusedly. "Yeah, I thought we were just going to talk," he mumbled. "Family talk. It stopped being just a family matter the moment you broke the law." Higgs cut him off. "It's a legal matter now." Bryce lowered his head. "I realize that what I did was wrong," he said quietly.
"I want to make it right."
"What exactly are you suggesting?" Higgs asked. "Yeah," Bryce hesitated. "I can give you the keys to the new locks." Right now, he pulled a bunch of keys out of his pocket and put them on the table. Higgs looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I nodded silently. "That's a good first step," the lawyer said, taking the keys. "But not enough. We demand a written apology, compensation for moral damage, and guarantees that this will not happen again in the future." "Of course I'll apologize," Bryce said quickly. How much do you want for moral damages?" Higgs named the amount, and Bryce's eyes widened. "But we don't have that kind of money." "In that case, we can discuss installment payments," Higgs continued calmly. "Or alternative compensation options. For example, your immediate departure from Mr. Nimble's house." Bryce turned pale. "Move out, but where would we live?" "That's not Mr. Nimble's problem." Higgs was adamant. "You're an adult, your wife works, find a place you can afford." "Dad," Bryce turned to me with desperation in his eyes. "You're not going to throw us out on the street, are you? We made a mistake, I admit it. But we're family." I stared at him for a long time, trying to see in this grown man the little boy who used to run toward me when I came back from my flights. That little boy who cried when I left and counted the days until I returned. "A family doesn't do what you did," I finally said. "But I'm not going to kick you out immediately. You'll have a month to find a new place to live." Higgs gave me a quick glance but didn't object. "A month?" Bryce interjected. "But that's very little. We're not going to make it." "A month," I repeated firmly, "and during that time you'll be paying rent, at market rate." "Rent?" Bryce looked shocked. "But we'd never—" "Exactly. You lived in my house for free for almost 3 years. It's not going to happen again." Bryce sat with his head down, clearly not knowing what to say. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Nimble." Higgs intervened, turning to Bryce. "Given the circumstances, your father could demand immediate eviction through the courts with compensation for all legal fees." "Yeah, I understand," Bryce mumbled. "Thanks, Dad." "One more condition," I added. "Don't touch anything in the house. No throwing away, moving, or hiding any of my stuff." "Sure," Bryce agreed quickly. Great. Higgs pulled out a pre-prepared document from a folder. "In that case, I suggest you sign an agreement stating all these terms. It will keep us from any misunderstandings in the future." Bryce took the document and began to read it, but it was obvious that he didn't understand the legal terms. "It's okay," I said, seeing his confusion. "It just records what we just agreed to." Bryce gave me a grateful look and signed in the space provided. Higgs and I signed the document too. "You'll keep a copy," the lawyer said, handing Bryce a copy. "I remind you that violation of the terms of the agreement may result in a lawsuit." Bryce nodded, tucking the paper into the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked depressed, but at the same time a little calmer. Apparently, he'd expected more stringent terms. "Can I talk to my father alone?" he asked, looking at Higgs. The lawyer turned to me, waiting for a decision. "Just 5 minutes," Bryce added. "Please." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to hear what he had to say without witnesses, but the other part of me feared more manipulation. "Okay," I finally decided. 5 minutes. Higgs and Kate left the room, leaving us alone. As soon as the door closed, Bryce stepped forward. "Dad, I have to explain," he began hurriedly. "It was Harper. She kept pushing me, said we were wasting our time living with you, that the house should be ours. I tried to explain to her that it wasn't right, but she—" "That's enough," I held up my hand, stopping him. "You're a grown man, Bryce. You don't need to take it out on your wife, but it's true." There was desperation in his voice. She threatened to leave me if I didn't. She said I was spineless, that I couldn't take care of our future. I looked at him and saw a frightened boy looking for excuses for his actions. It was always like that. The broken window was the ball's fault. The bad grade was the teacher's fault. The missed classes were the fault of friends who made you skip school. "You could have just talked to me," I said tiredly. "Come and say, 'Dad, we need our own place.' I'd help you with a down payment on an apartment. Or we could have talked about other options. But instead, you decided to just kick me out of my house." Bryce lowered his head. "I know, it was awful. I'm sorry, Dad, I really am." "Sorry isn't enough," I replied. "Trust is broken, Bryce, and it's not easy to rebuild. What can I do?" There was desperation in his voice. "Tell me and I'll do it." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to see the sincerity behind his words. Part of me wanted to believe he was truly remorseful, but another part of me remembered how he'd stood next to Harper on the porch when she'd threatened to call the police. "Keep your word," I finally said. "Fulfill the terms of the agreement. Find a new place to live within a month. Don't cause trouble when I get back to the house. That would be a good start." Bryce nodded, looking a little disappointed. Apparently, he'd expected a more emotional response. Forgiveness, a hug. But I couldn't give him that. Not now. Not when the wound was too fresh. "One more thing," I added, remembering something important. "Bring back all of Elizabeth's things you've put away or hidden. Every single one of them." His face trembled. "Yeah. I'll try to find everything I can." "Not try, but find it," I said firmly. "That's out of the question." Our 5 minutes were up and there was a tactful knock on the door. Higgs and Kate came back into the room. "Are we done?" the lawyer asked, looking at me. I nodded. "Yeah, everything's discussed." Bryce stood up, looking a little confused. "When are you coming home?" he asked quietly. "Tomorrow," I answered. 10 o'clock in the morning. Make sure you'll both be there." He nodded, and with one last glance at me, he left the room. When the door closed behind him, I felt strangely empty. "You've done well, Mr. Nimble," Higgs said, gathering up the papers. "The terms are fair but firm. I'll make the necessary arrangements for your return home." "Thank you," I stood up, feeling suddenly tired. "I couldn't have done it without you." Kate came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good," he said. "And you didn't let yourself begrudge it. I'm proud of you, old man." We went outside. It was a clear, sunny day, but I felt only a heaviness in my heart. Victory should have been satisfying, but instead I felt only bitterness. My son had come to me, not because he realized his mistake, but because he was afraid of the consequences. And even now, cornered, he was trying to put the blame on Harper to avoid responsibility.
Hey,
Kate poked me lightly in the shoulder.
don't be so down on yourself. The important thing is you're coming home. You can deal with the rest later.
I nodded, trying to concentrate on that thought. Really, the most important thing right now was to get back to my house, to regain control of the situation, and the relationship with my son. Maybe things will change in time. Or not. After all, a man can't live his life for someone else, even if that someone else is his own child. "Let's go to my place," Kate said.
Pack your things, get some rest before tomorrow.
It's not going to be easy.
I glanced once more at the building where Bryce had disappeared. I wondered what he would tell Harper. How would he explain to her that their plan had failed? And what would they do now that they only had a month to find a new place to live? Well, that's not my problem. I've done everything I can to give them a roof over their heads, to support them all these years. Now they have to build their lives on their own, without my help.
And maybe it's for the best, for all of us.
The morning was surprisingly clear and fresh. I woke up earlier than usual before sunrise and lay staring up at the ceiling of Keith's guest room for a long time. My thoughts swirled randomly in my head. What was going to happen in my own house today? How will my meeting with Harper go? What would I say when I looked her in the eye after everything that had happened?
Keith, noticing my condition at breakfast, tried to cheer me up in his own way.
Don't worry, old boy. Just remember that you are the master of the situation. This is your home and they are uninvited guests with an overdue invitation. I nodded, grateful for the encouragement, though I still felt uneasy inside. It was one thing to win a legal battle and quite another to return to the house where you'd been betrayed by the people closest to you. Higgs called at 8:30 sharp.
Good morning, Mr. Nimble. Ready to go home?
As ready as I can be, I answered honestly. I've made arrangements with the county sheriff. Deputy Sheriff Parker will accompany us as a representative of the law, purely formally, to prevent possible conflicts. Is that really necessary? I asked, imagining driving up to my own house in a police car in front of all the neighbors. Unfortunately, yes. After what happened, it's better to be safe. Besides, having an official present will make your return more credible. We agreed to meet at my house at 10 in the morning. Keith insisted on coming with me. I'll stay out of the way, he said.
I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly.
At 9:45, we parked across the street from my house. Bryce's car was in the driveway, which meant they were home. At 9:55, Higgs pulled up in his spotlessly clean black sedan. And at exactly 10, with a punctuality worthy of a military man, the sheriff's car showed up.
Deputy Parker was a sturdy middle-aged man with an alert gaze and calm movements.
He shook my hand briefly and got right to the point. Mr. Nimble, I'm familiar with the situation. My job is to ensure your peaceful return to the property and prevent any possible conflicts. If there are any problems, I will intervene, but I hope it won't be necessary.
I nodded,
feeling strangely grateful for his businesslike approach. No judgment or curiosity, just a professional doing his job. The three of us, me, Higgs, and the deputy sheriff, headed toward the house. Keith stayed in the car as promised, but his presence still gave me confidence. I climbed the familiar porch steps and rang the doorbell of my own house. It was a strange, humbling feeling.
The door opened almost immediately, as if Bryce had been standing behind it, waiting for us to arrive. He looked tense, but he kept his cool.
"Dad," he nodded. Then, noticing the deputy sheriff, he paled slightly. Is that necessary?" "Just a precaution," Higgs answered in my place. "Considering previous events." Bryce nodded reluctantly and stepped back, letting us into the house. "Is Harper home?" I asked, looking around. "Yeah, she's in the kitchen." I walked inside and immediately noticed the first changes. The pictures of Elizabeth on the mantelpiece were gone. In their place were some decorative knickknacks, the glass figurines Harper had always loved to collect. The old plaid that Elizabeth had knitted with her own hands and that always lay on the couch was gone too. I felt a wave of anger rising inside, but I held back. Not now.
First, I need to make sure I'm officially back in my house.
Harper came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. When she saw the deputy, she froze for a second, but quickly pulled herself together. "Randall," she nodded with a strained smile. "Welcome home." "Thank you," I replied dryly.
though it was strange to hear such words from the man who'd changed the locks a week ago to keep me out of my own house. Harper blushed a little, but she got over it quickly. "It was a misunderstanding," she said, casting a quick glance at the deputy sheriff. "Bryce and I were just concerned about the safety of the house, given your age and frequent absences." "Mrs. Nimble," Higgs intervened, "let's not waste time rewriting history. We all know what happened. What's important now is that the transition goes smoothly and without further conflict." Harper pressed her lips together but remained silent. Deputy Sheriff Parker coughed, drawing attention. "I need to make sure Mr. Nimble has unobstructed access to all areas of the house," he said. "I also need to record that the keys to all the locks have been turned over to the rightful owner." Bryce pulled a bunch of keys out of his pocket and handed them to me. "Here, Dad, all the keys are in here, the front door, the back door, the garage." I took the keys, trying not to show how much it hurt me to see these new, unfamiliar keys to the house I'd lived in all my life. "Mr. Nimble," the deputy sheriff continued, "I suggest you take a look around the house to make sure everything is in order. I'll accompany you." I nodded and moved toward the stairs leading up to the second floor, where Elizabeth and I had once shared a bedroom and where Bryce and Harper now lived. Along the way, I noticed more changes. Some of the paintings on the walls were gone. The antique clock I'd gotten from my father, the antique vase in the alcove by the stairs. As I made my way up to the second floor, I headed straight for the former bedroom. Bryce and Harper followed me at a distance, as did the deputy sheriff with Higgs. Opening the door, I froze on the threshold. The room had been completely transformed. There was no trace of the cozy space Elizabeth and I had created over the years. New wallpaper in cool gray-blue tones, modern furniture, no personal belongings or photos. We decided to redecorate," Bryce said nervously behind me. "The room was so old-fashioned." I nodded silently, not trusting my voice. The room where I'd spent so many years with the woman I loved, where we'd laughed and cried, dreamed and made plans. Now, there's nothing left but the space between the four walls. "Where are my things?" I finally asked. "And Elizabeth's stuff?" Bryce and Harper looked at each other. "We put everything in boxes," Bryce began uncertainly. "They're in the garage." "Some of the things were so old and worn out," Harper interjected. "We got rid of them so we wouldn't clutter up the house." "We got rid of it?" I asked, feeling the blood rush to my face. "What exactly did you throw away?" Harper shrugged with feigned indifference. "Nothing of value, just old junk, worn-out clothes, some papers, old photo albums." "Photo albums?" I felt a tearing inside. "You threw away our family photo albums. They were so dusty and took up a lot of space," Harper said, as if she were explaining the obvious to a child. "Besides, in the age of digital photos, paper albums are a thing of the past." I stood there, unable to believe what was happening. The photo albums that Elizabeth and I had carefully collected our entire lives, our wedding, Bryce's birth, his first steps, school celebrations, family trips. It's all just thrown away like trash. "Where's the desk?" I asked, looking around the room. The antique oak desk where my father and I worked had disappeared without a trace. "We took it to a thrift store," Bryce said, avoiding my gaze. "It was too bulky and didn't fit in with the new decor." "You sold my desk?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Without my permission?" "Technically," Higgs interjected, "it could be considered theft or misappropriation of property." Harper threw an annoyed look at the lawyer. "We weren't stealing, we just cleared a space. Randall wasn't using the stuff anyway." "It doesn't matter, Mrs. Nimble," Higgs replied calmly. "Ownership doesn't depend on how often a thing is used." I silently left the room and headed for the other rooms on the second floor. Bryce's room, which Elizabeth and I had carefully kept after he moved in, was now a sort of home office for Harper. The guest bedroom became a walk-in closet.
Nowhere was there a trace of the former home I'd known and loved. Walking down to the first floor, I headed straight for my office. The lock on the door was broken. Apparently, they had tried to break in after changing the front door locks. Inside, chaos reigned. Desk drawers pulled out, papers scattered. The safe in the corner of the room bore the marks of an attempted break-in. "Did you try to open my safe?" I asked, turning to Bryce and Harper, who were standing in the doorway. We were looking for the deeds to the house," Bryce mumbled, blushing.
"We wanted to make sure everything was in order."
You mean you wanted to find a loophole to take my house?
I didn't hide the bitterness in my voice. Bryce didn't say anything, but his face spoke for him.
Mr. Nimble,
Deputy Parker intervened.
would you like to file a report for attempted burglary and theft of property?
I wondered. File a report on my own son. Bring the situation to a criminal case. Despite all the pain and anger, I couldn't bring myself to do it. "No," I finally answered. "But I want an official report to be made on the state of the house and the missing items." "A reasonable solution," Higgs nodded. "It will document the damage to your property." We continued the inspection of the house. In the living room, the collection of vintage records I'd collected all my life was gone. The dining room was missing the silver candlesticks Elizabeth and I had gotten for our silver wedding anniversary. Missing from the kitchen were her favorite china dishes that she only used on special occasions. Finally, we reached the garage. There were indeed boxes here. Dozens of boxes labeled something like junk or junk. "Is this all that's left of our stuff?" I asked, looking at these faceless cardboard boxes. "We kept everything that seemed important," Harper replied, but her voice sounded unsure. I walked over to the nearest box and opened it. Inside was a mess of framed photos, documents, small mementos, all piled up as they were, with no respect for these things or the memories they held. In the second box, I found Elizabeth's clothes, neatly folded dresses, blouses, scarves, and things I'd hesitated to touch after her death, keeping as a memory of her. Now they were unceremoniously packed away like trash waiting to be hauled away. The third box contained some of the missing photo albums, not all of them, but at least some. I clutched them to my chest with relief. "Deputy Parker," I turned to the officer, "I'd like you to record the condition of these items and the fact that many of the items are missing." Parker nodded and pulled out a clipboard, beginning to take notes and pictures. Harper watched this process with growing concern. "Randall, you're not going to sue us, are you?" she finally asked. "We're family." "Family?" I looked at her puzzled. "You kicked me out of my own house, changed the locks, got rid of things I cared about, and now you're talking about family."
"What we did was wrong,"
Bryce interjected. "I admit it, but we can fix it. Try to start over." I shook my head. It wasn't just pain inside, it was an emptiness, cold and unfathomable. I looked at my son and his wife and didn't recognize them. Or perhaps it was the first time I'd ever seen them real. "Let's get the formalities over with," I said, turning to Higgs and the deputy sheriff. "I want to officially document my return to the house and the condition of the property." We spent the next hour writing up the deeds and taking pictures. Higgs methodically wrote down every detail, every item that was missing or damaged. Deputy Parker recorded everything on his clipboard. Bryce and Harper watched the process in silence, occasionally exchanging concerned glances. When the formalities were complete, the deputy turned to me.
"Mr. Nimble, you're officially reinstated to your property. If you have any problems, feel free to contact the sheriff's office."
"Thank you for your help." I thanked him sincerely. "Mr. and Mrs. Nimble." Parker turned to Bryce and Harper. "I must remind you that the agreement you signed requires you to vacate the premises within 30 days. Any attempts to damage the property, remove valuables without the owner's permission, or obstruct his residence will be treated as an offense." Harper went pale, and Bryce nodded awkwardly. "We understand," he muttered. When the deputy left, there was a heavy silence in the house. Higgs gathered up his papers, preparing to leave, but before he did, he took me aside. "Mr. Nimble, would you be comfortable staying here with them for this month?" he asked quietly. "There are alternatives if you'd prefer not to share a roof with them." I wondered. The thought of spending a whole month under the same roof with the people who had betrayed me seemed unbearable. But at the same time, I didn't want to leave my home, not again. "I'll stay," I decided. "This is my home. I won't let them kick me out of here again." Higgs nodded with understanding. "In that case, I recommend new locks on your bedroom and study doors, and maybe some CCTV cameras, just for your peace of mind." "Good advice," I agreed. "I'll get on it today." When Higgs left, I was alone with Bryce and Harper. We stood in the living room looking at each other like strangers. "What now?" Bryce finally asked. "Now you're looking for a new place to live," I answered simply. "And I'm going to live in my house." "But we could—" Harper started, but I held up my hand to stop her. "No, Harper, we couldn't. What you did can't just be forgotten or forgiven. You didn't just kick me out, you tried to erase my whole life, all my memories. You threw away pictures of my wife, sold things that had been in our family for generations, treated it all like garbage." "We didn't think," Bryce started. "Exactly, you didn't think. You didn't think about me, about my feelings, about what these things meant to me. You were only thinking about yourself." Harper pressed her lips together, clearly holding back a harsh response. Bryce looked depressed. "What about my old bedroom downstairs?" I asked, changing the subject. "Did you remodel everything down there too?" "No," Bryce answered. "It's just pretty much the way it was." "Good, I'll sleep there, and I expect you to respect my privacy. No trespassing in my room or office." They nodded silently. "And also," I added, "I want you to return anything you've taken or sold. The writing desk, the record collection, the silver candlesticks, Elizabeth's china, everything." "But we've already sold some things," Harper objected. "We can't." "Then find a way to buy them back," I said firmly. "Or compensate them for their value. That's out of the question." Harper looked like she wanted to object, but Bryce put his hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "We'll do our best, Dad," he said quietly. I nodded and headed toward my bedroom, feeling the need to be alone. Stepping across the threshold of the room, I was relieved to find that really not much had changed here. The bed was in the same place. The curtains were still the same, even Elizabeth's picture on the bedside table was still there. I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling the weight of the day. Returning home should have brought relief, but instead, I felt only emptiness and disappointment. Too much had been lost, not just things, but trust, respect, the very idea of family. Looking at Elizabeth's picture, I suddenly realized that I had made a final decision, a decision that had been ripening inside me all these days, but only took shape now when I saw with my own eyes what had been done to our home, to our memories. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Higgs' number.
"Mr. Nimble, is everything all right?"
I could hear the concern in his voice. "Yes, everything's fine," I answered. "I made a decision about that document you showed me earlier, the inheritance." "Are you sure? It's a big step." "I'm absolutely sure," I said firmly. "But that's not all. There's something else I'd like to discuss with you. The possibility of selling the house." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You want to sell the house?" Higgs asked cautiously. "Yes," I answered, feeling strangely relieved by the decision. "I can't live here anymore. There are too many memories, good and bad. I need a fresh start."
"I understand," Higgs' voice sounded sympathetic. "It's a reasonable decision given the circumstances. We can start the process immediately if you're sure." "I'm sure," I said, looking at Elizabeth's picture. "More than sure." When I finished talking, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders.
The house that had once been the center of happiness had become a source of pain. Perhaps it would bring more joy to someone else.
I ran my hand over the sheets on the bed, the wooden frame of Elizabeth's photograph, the spines of the books on the shelf, saying goodbye to these things, to these walls, to this life. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," I whispered, looking at her smiling face in the photograph. "I know you loved this house, but it's not the same as it was when you were here. And I'm not the same anymore. It's time for both of us to move on. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd made the right decision. A decision that would allow me not just to exist, but to move on. Without anger, without bitterness, without constant reminders of betrayal. Free. For the next 2 weeks, we lived in a strange limbo. Me in my bedroom on the first floor, Bryce and Harper upstairs. We hardly ever crossed paths, carefully avoiding meals together or even casual encounters in the hallway. When we did meet, our exchanges were minimal and formal. I installed new locks on my bedroom and study doors as Higgs had advised. While I didn't expect Bryce and Harper to try to steal anything again, these precautions gave me a sense of security I'd been deprived of for too long. Meetings with the realtor took place when they weren't home. Jennifer Oakes, an experienced real estate agent, priced the house higher than I expected. "The neighborhood is in high demand, Mr. Nimble," she explained, making notes on her clipboard. "Especially families with children. Schools close by, park 5 minutes away, low crime rate. I think we can put it on the market for a very good price." I nodded as I listened to her professional comments and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness at parting with the place where my whole life had been spent. Relief at the thought that I would soon be free of it all. At the same time, I was working with Higgs on changing my will. Bryce was no longer my heir. Instead, I decided to divide the future inheritance between a charity for trucking veterans and my niece, Elizabeth, the only relative with whom I maintained a warm relationship. "Are you sure you don't want to leave at least a small portion to your son?" Higgs asked cautiously as we signed the papers. "I'm absolutely sure," I answered. "He's already shown me how he's going to use that money." Higgs nodded understandingly and didn't bring it up again. In the 3rd week of my return home, Jennifer told me that she had found a potential buyer. A young family, 2 kids. Husband works at a university, wife is a doctor, very nice people, and they are well positioned to buy. "When do they want to see the house?" I suggested tomorrow 10 in the morning. "Would that suit you?" I nodded, mentally noting that Bryce would be at work at that time and Harper would probably be too. Less awkwardness for all of us. Fate, however, had it differently. The next morning, when the car with the prospective buyers pulled up to the house, the front door swung open and Harper appeared on the doorstep. She'd taken a day off work, which I hadn't expected. "Randall?" She looked in surprise at Jennifer and the couple standing next to her.
What's going on?
I had no choice but to introduce Jennifer and explain the purpose of their visit. Harper's face first turned pale, then red.
You're selling the house?
She sounded outraged.
Without discussing it with us?
"I don't need to discuss anything with you," I replied calmly. "The house belongs to me and I have the right to use it as I see fit." Harper looked as if she wanted to say something else, but she held back, glancing at the prospective buyers watching us with interest. "We'll talk about this later," she said through gritted teeth and turned and walked away to the 2nd floor. The tour of the house went well, despite the awkward beginning. The young couple was delighted with the spacious rooms, large yard and cozy veranda. They asked questions about the neighborhood, neighbors, nearby stores. I answered honestly and kindly, feeling that these were people I could easily hand my home over to. When they left, promising to contact Jennifer in the coming days, Harper came down to the 1st floor. Her face was impenetrable, but I could see her hands twitching, a sure sign of barely contained anger. "When were you going to tell us you were selling the house?" she asked in a deceptively calm tone. "When the deal would have been done," I answered honestly. "You still have to vacate the house in a week according to our agreement. What difference does it make who the next owner is?" "What difference does it make?" Harper almost choked with indignation. This is our house. We live here. You live here as guests, I corrected. Temporary guests who should be moving out soon. What about Bryce? Have you even thought about your son? This house was supposed to be his after. She trailed off. She paused, but we both knew she meant after you died. I've reconsidered that too, I said calmly. Bryce is no longer my heir.
Not to the house or anything else.
Harper froze, looking at me with widened eyes. You can't, I can, I interrupted, and I already have. The papers are signed and certified. She looked at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe she was just now realizing that I wasn't a helpless old man who could be manipulated. Bryce is going to be... She hesitated, searching for words. Will be destroyed when he finds out.
He made his own choice,
I answered, feeling the coldness in my chest. He chose a side. Now let him live with the consequences. Harper left upstairs, slamming the bedroom door loudly. I heard her immediately dial someone's number, most likely Bryce, and start talking in a fast, agitated voice.
I didn't eavesdrop and retired to the garden, where I spent the rest of the day pruning the overgrown rose bushes Elizabeth loved so much.
Bryce came home from work earlier than usual. I heard his car door slam, quick footsteps tapping on the driveway, the front door swinging open. He found me in the garden, still tending to the roses. Is it true? He asked without preamble. Are you selling the house?
I straightened up, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves.
Yes, but why? It's our family home. Generations of Nimbles have grown up here. That's exactly why, I answered. I don't want the house where my parents lived, where Elizabeth and I raised you, to go to people who don't respect its history and memory. Bryce looked shocked. You mean us? But we're your family.
A family doesn't throw their relatives out on the street, or change their locks, or get rid of their things, I said quietly but firmly.
What you've done has destroyed the very concept of family. We were wrong, Dad, his voice was pleading. We've already apologized. What more do you want from us? Nothing, I said simply. Absolutely nothing, and that was the whole point. Bryce looked at me puzzled, as if he couldn't understand what I meant.
What about me? He finally asked.
Harper said you changed your will. Yes, I nodded. You're no longer my heir. His face contorted with pain and anger. But I'm your son, your only child. Who will you leave everything to? It's none of your business, I said calmly. But it's not fair, he exclaimed. You can't just... Fair? I felt the wave of anger I'd been holding back for so long rising in me. You're talking about fair after everything you've done? Bryce took a step back, clearly not expecting that reaction. We did make a mistake, he said more quietly. But that's no reason to disinherit me. It's no reason to sell the house our family lived in. It wasn't a mistake. I shook my head.
A mistake is when a person does something unintentionally, without realizing the consequences.
You acted with complete awareness. You planned everything in advance. You waited for me to leave, changed the locks, threw away my things. It was a deliberate act. Yeah, don't tell me it was Harper, I interrupted him. You're a grown man, Bryce. You made your choice. We stood in the middle of the garden, looking at each other like strangers.
We were only a few feet apart,
but it felt like a chasm. What will happen to the house? He asked at last. A good family will buy it, people who will appreciate it. And you, where will you go? I smiled, feeling strangely relieved by the decision. I'm going back on the road, bought a small trailer. I'll be traveling the country like I've always dreamed of. Bryce looked at me with bewilderment.
But you're 67.
You can't just traveling around the country in a trailer. I can, I said calmly. And I will. Unlike you, I've always loved the road. I've always felt truly alive when I'm on the move. But what about us? There was confusion in his voice. You will live your life. I answered, and I'll live mine. Just like that, we're not family anymore? I stared at him for a long time, trying to see in this grown man the little boy I'd once loved more than anything. The boy who used to run to me, arms outstretched when I'd come back from flights. The boy who wanted to be a trucker like his daddy and travel all over the country. A family can't be destroyed overnight, Bryce, I finally said. It takes years of small betrayals, unnoticed hurts, unspoken words. Our family ceased to exist long before you changed the locks. He lowered his head, unable to find the words to object. When are you leaving? He asked quietly. As soon as the deal is finalized. The potential buyers are very interested, so I think it's a matter of weeks. And us? You have a week left according to our agreement. After that, you have to vacate the house whether the deal closes or not. Bryce nodded, accepting the inevitable. Could I at least get my baby stuff, the pictures? Of course, I answered, but just my own. No family heirlooms, no Elizabeth stuff. I understand, he was quiet for a moment, then added, You know, I never thought it would end up like this. Neither did I answered honestly. But life rarely lives up to our expectations. He nodded and, without another word, went into the house. I stayed in the garden, staring at the setting sun, coloring the sky's shades of orange and pink. A strange calmness filled me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the master of my own destiny. Events were unfolding faster than I had expected. 2 days after the house inspection, Jennifer called with the happy news. Mr. Nimble, they're making an offer, and it's even higher than we expected. I listened to the details, discussed terms and conditions. Everything was working out perfectly. When can we sign the papers? They're ready to move quickly. If you're happy with their offer, we can have it done within a week. I'm fine with it, I confirm. Let's do it. The week went by in a flurry of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, signing papers. Bryce and Harper were also actively looking for a new place to live, realizing that there would be no delay. They found a small apartment in a high-rise on the other side of town and were hurriedly packing. I watched their packing with detached interest. It was strange to see them carry boxes and bags out of the house, load them into the car, drive away, and come back for another batch. It was like the final scene of a play that had gone on too long. On their last day at the house, I intentionally left to avoid awkward goodbyes. Spent the day with Keith, telling him about my travel plans. Are you sure you want to get back on the road? He asked, squinting his eyes. At our age, many people prefer a sedentary life. I've never been so sure, I replied. All my life, I've traveled the country because that was my job. Now I'm going to do it for me. I'll see places I've always wanted to visit but never had the time. Kate nodded understandingly. What about money? Enough to live like this? More than enough, I smiled. The sale of the house brought in a good amount of money. Plus the pension. I'll be able to live comfortably and not deny myself anything. No regrets? Keith looked at me carefully. About the house, about the son. I thought about it, analyzing my feelings honestly. There are always regrets, I finally answered. About not being able to raise my son better. About losing Elizabeth so early. About a lot of things, but not about my decision. It was the right one. When I got home that evening, the house was empty. Bryce and Harper had taken all their stuff and left their keys on the kitchen table. No note, no goodbye. Just walked out of my life as unceremoniously as they tried to kick me out of the house. I went around the rooms, checking to see if anything was left behind. Everything was fine. They had only taken what they owned, not touching any family heirlooms. I guess the lesson had been learned. The next day, I signed the final papers to sell the house. Jennifer shook my hand, congratulating me on a successful transaction. I hope you won't miss this place, she said. I will, I answered honestly. But missing something doesn't mean you'll be sorry when it's over. She nodded understandingly. When do you plan to vacate the house? In a week. I need to pack my things. decide what to take with me and what to sell or give away. And where are you headed? I smiled, feeling the anticipation fill me. Down south, to Georgia first. My late wife's niece lives there. I'll visit her and then, who knows, maybe the Grand Canyon. I've always wanted to see it, but never took the time to stop and just look. Jennifer smiled. That sounds like a wonderful experience. A lot of people your age are hesitant to make that kind of change. At my age, I said, you can't waste time regretting the past. You have to live in the present and think about the future, however short it may be. I spent the last week in the house sorting things. Some I packed for travel, some I set aside for a garage sale, some I decided to just leave to new owners. I was especially careful to select memorabilia related to Elizabeth. Photos, letters, small souvenirs from our trips together. Every evening I would go out on the veranda, sit in the old rocking chair and watch the sunset, saying goodbye to the house, to this life, to the past. On the last day, I met with the new owners to hand them the keys. A young couple brought their children with them, a boy about 8 years old and a girl about 6. The children were excitedly running around the rooms, choosing where their bedrooms would be. "We are very grateful to you for this house," the woman said, shaking my hand. "We promise we'll take good care of it." "I know," I smiled. "That's why I chose you. A house should be filled with life and love." We exchanged the last formalities, and I walked out onto the porch where Keith was waiting for me in his pickup truck. My new trailer was already hitched to it, a compact but comfortable motorhome where I was going to spend the next few years of my life. I looked back one last time at the house where I had lived my entire life. Strangely, I felt no sadness, just a slight nostalgia and anticipation of new adventures. "Ready?" Kate asked as I got into the car. "More than ready," I answered, buckling my seatbelt. "Let's go." We hit the road. I looked ahead at the road ahead of us and felt the past getting farther and farther behind me with every kilometer. Somewhere out there, in the city I was leaving, were Bryce and Harper in their new apartment, probably still angry and disappointed with the way things had turned out. But that was no longer my story. My story was just beginning. At 67, I was finally free from commitment, from the weight of the past, from toxic relationships. There was a road ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt running off into the horizon, and I was ready to follow it wherever it led.